We're at the end, and by way of wrap-up, I'll tell you what ended up happening to the central characters in the story. Janara Greengrant, who was sitting right here and has magically appeared over there. That's extraordinary, Janara. It's amazing the government caught you after all that. The Janara, of course, now runs her own foundation. It's a healing foundation. I don't know that I can disclose your legal bills, Janara, but I can say, and I have said publicly, think of a number, a big number, and bloody will double it, and then triple it. Janara copped unbelievable legal bills defending herself from a government that had limitless funds trying to convict her of a trumped-up, ridiculous charge. The gentleman that you see on screen, Bob Randall, he still lives in Central Australia. He was utterly defamed by ABC Lateline. They have inferred, or they've said on tape, that he helped create an environment where a pedophile was abusing children. He was seriously defamed by it. By the way, his house was also raided by the Australian Federal Police at the same time that Janara's house was raided by the Australian Federal Police. They were raiding the house looking for evidence of a link to the National Indigenous Times. Bob Randall was never a source of the National Indigenous Times. His home was raided regardless. That's Dr. Jeff Stewart, of course. Dr. Jeff Stewart went on to become the Chief Medical Officer of the Aboriginal Medical Services Alliance in the Northern Territory. He is still a doctor today and is facing no sanction whatsoever for what he did. This is Brad Evans. You heard at the very start of the program, the reporter is Suzanne Smith, the producer is Brad Evans. Well, this is Brad Evans. He's the producer of this story. Brett works across the road, in fact. After Lateline, he went on to do and this is probably my favourite part of the whole story, he went on to do a stint with ABC's Media Watch program as their executive producer. By the way, Media Watch never published a word of this story, not one syllable. We'll get back to that at the very end. That is, of course, Tony Jones. The spirit is in this room, manipulating our computers. Tony Jones, I will say in Tony Jones' defence, had no knowledge of the nature of this reporting, no knowledge of the fact that the reporting was so dodgy when the story was broadcast. He was certainly made aware of it afterwards because it made it into the pages of some of the nation's biggest newspapers. It also found itself on the floor of Parliament in question time for a couple of days. He became aware of it then, but he has since described ABC Lateline's reporting of this issue and others as the best reporting that Lateline has ever done, or amongst the best reporting Lateline's ever done. And I would respectfully suggest that if you tell a big lie, you've got to tell big stories to back it up. And the claim that this was the best reporting they've done, well, I'd hate to see their worst reporting. This is the journalist who perpetrated the fraud. Suzanne Smith, she also works across the road. Suzanne took a break from ABC Lateline and reporting, but was still at the ABC, and is today the online investigations editor for the ABC. You would have read about her possibly if you read The Australian. I don't know why you wouldn't read The Australian, but if you do read The Australian, you would have seen in their media section 2 weeks ago a lengthy story called It's Mates That Matter at Media Watch. That is a story about a dodgy story Suzanne Smith perpetrated, which she's now in some trouble for, although not in the eyes of the ABC. And a story of which ABC's Media Watch has refused to report a syllable. It's irony, 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 and recurring themes, of course. There is Gregory Andrews, our former anonymous youth worker. Gregory Andrews is today, well, look, he never faced any sanction for what was done. He was called before a parliamentary inquiry, or there was an attempt to call him before a Senate estimates inquiry in federal parliament. He managed, in Gregory Andrews' inimitable fashion, to become the only public servant since Federation to avoid a parliamentary inquiry and scrutiny on the grounds of stress. The federal government decided he was too stressed to appear at the inquiry, so he was exonerated from appearing, and we never got to the bottom of some of the claims, unfortunately. But Gregory Andrews has fallen on his feet. He resigned from the department when the Liberal government was ousted from office, and has resurfaced as the CEO of Indigenous Community Volunteers. He's now running an organisation that engages with Aboriginal communities as an NGO. There was a complaint from the community of Mutijula, that's Susie running after it, complaint from the community of Mutijula to the ABC. Now the ABC has a complaints review panel, it's called. Their job as an independent review panel, even though they're appointed by the ABC and funded by the ABC, they're described by the ABC as independent. Their job is to review serious complaints of misconduct. This late line story was the subject of a lengthy complaint to the ABC. The Independent Complaints Review Panel reviewed the complaint. They found absolutely no problem with the story whatsoever, with one exception. The fact that, as you saw at the very beginning, footage of Roper River and other communities was not labelled as file footage. That is the ABC Complaint Review Panel's only objection to the late line story. In relation to the issue of Gregory Andrews, they say it was reasonable to protect Mr Andrews' identity, even though we all now know he was under no threat whatsoever and he had originally intended to appear as himself. In relation to the Dr Jeff Stewart story and the revelations that Dr Stewart was prescribing Viagra to the alleged pedophile, they say that it was ABC Late Line's decision whether or not they would publish that additional external story. So it's up to Late Line to decide whether or not they want to report that. They don't have to, they're not beholden to report any story. They're not beholden to report their mistakes, is what the ABC is saying. I will show you what else the ABC didn't report. This is that is Superintendent Colin Gwynn, quite a well-known Northern Territory police officer. As a result of the late line story, they investigated the claims in the story and, quote, "We found some evidence of petrol being provided to children. There's certainly no evidence there that the petrol is being provided to entice children to provide sexual favours, none whatsoever." Now, it's a matter of some dispute, of course. Muntijara Wilson, the old Aboriginal lady, believes that petrol was being supplied to children to induce them to have sex. Although it's worth noting, Muntijara hadn't lived in Mutijula for 7 years when she appeared on that program. Muntijara Wilson was talking about Central Australia generally. Late Line was talking about Central Mutijula specifically. But you can dispute whether or not the police investigation was exhaustive, and having had something to do with the Northern Territory Police over some years, I respectfully suggest it probably wasn't exhaustive. But for Late Line to not report that story, and they didn't report a word of this. They didn't report a word of a police investigation into their own story. They had no space. I'll show you what they did have space to report. The headline is, "Indigenous Community Expresses Thanks for Exposing Child Abuse." So they had no space to report the police investigation into their story, which found their story had no basis. They had no space to report revelations that Dr Jeff Stewart, the chief witness in their story, was prescribing Viagra to the pedophile, or the alleged pedophile, but they did have space to to run a fluff piece about what a great job they had done in reporting all these things. And it's worth noting, for those who don't know, on June 21, 2006, Late Line ran the story that we've looked at tonight. On June 22, 2006, Claire Martin, the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, announced a 6-month inquiry into child sexual abuse in Aboriginal communities. That 6-month inquiry was called the Little Children are Sacred Report. The Little Children are Sacred Report is the basis for the Northern Territory intervention. Late Line's reporting led directly to the Northern Territory intervention, and that story specifically led directly to the Northern Territory intervention. It's a matter for people whether or not you can make your own judgments having seen what you've seen. If you want to go to the ABC website, go to Latelin's website, have a look in their archives in June 2006. You'll find the story, and you can read the ABC Complaint Review Panel's findings in full and make your own mind up. But I've been a journalist 20 years, and I think I'm not a bad journalist. This is the greatest journalistic fraud I have ever seen. I've seen Today Tonight pull some doozies. I've seen The Australian pull some hooers in Aboriginal affairs, but I have never seen a fraud of this scale, let alone a response from a national broadcaster, which was to attack the people involved in exposing the fraud and to refuse to report large sections of the story that fell over. I should also note, in closing, and then if we've got time we'll take questions, I should also note, when the Jeff Stewart story broke about Viagra, we broke the story for obvious bloody reasons. It had a pedophile, it had Aboriginal people, and it had Viagra. We didn't have to push the story to mainstream media. They were all over it like a rash. It had all the ingredients for a great story: dangerous black men, drugs and erections. They went absolutely ballistic. There's only one news outlet in the country that refused to report a single syllable of the Jeff Stewart story, and it was the ABC. And I mean the ABC. There wasn't a radio station or a television station or an online forum anywhere in the ABC that published one word of the Jeff Stewart Viagra story. Not one outlet published the story. And as I said, to this day, Media Watch has never published a syllable of it. The only reason you're hearing about it, obviously, is because you came tonight. And thank you for coming.